as well. We both lead the Atlanta Marketo user group together. And it's been a little bit since we've met because of everything going virtual, and there's a lot of virtual user group meetings, but we're excited to get together today. We're going to be going through some quick housekeeping, won't take long. We've got an amazing first-time champion speaking with us today, Brandon. We'll be passing it off to him in a little bit to talk about Webhooks, API, and Salesforce Sync, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for just Q&A and just open discussion and catching up. So just some of our typical housekeeping slides, you know, user group rules. It's a very friendly place, no selling, no self-promotion, things like that. We're all here to just connect and network and learn from each other. And you can go to the next slide. And most people signed up through Bevy, but if you manage to get the URL for the meeting without signing up through Bevy, make sure you do sign up through Bevy. That's where they're managing all of their virtual user groups and in-person user groups when they return, and that's how you get invites and things to the next meetings. So we have a link in the slides that we'll be sending out here for anybody who may not have signed up through Bevy. So make sure you're in there, not just for the Atlanta user group meetings, but for all cities are virtual right now. So you have quite a wide variety of topics and things you can choose from. And then a couple of upcoming opportunities for everyone. If you weren't aware, Adobe Summit is next week. It's a 2-day event. They've added in a lot of really great marketing sessions in general, but also Marketo sessions. So if you haven't signed up for that, definitely do recommend you sign up. The nice thing about it is the sessions are only 30 minutes long. So for me, when you're sitting virtual all day, it's kind of nice it's that short. It's easier to fit it into your schedule and also easier to stay engaged during that time. So definitely make sure if you're not signed up, you check that out. A lot of good stuff coming there. And there's also brain dates at Adobe Summit. You can sign up for brain dates to get in small networking groups or have one-on-ones directly with other networking peers. So definitely check that out on the website as well. And then if you haven't already, I know this is virtual, so we have a lot of people maybe outside the Atlanta area, but the Adobe Experience Maker Awards are open for submissions through the end of April. Usually that used to go kind of hand in hand with the Adobe Summit, but it's following Adobe Summit list this year. So definitely apply. I know selfishly, I love it when I see the Atlanta companies and finalists make it for the Adobe Experience Maker Awards. So definitely recommend submitting for that. And if you need any help or have any questions about that, you know, Taylor and I are definitely available to give some insight and input. And with that, I'll hand it off. Oh,
I was just going to say, and Jenny was actually a finalist in last year's Adobe Experience Maker Awards.
Yeah, so hopefully somebody else from Atlanta can take it home this year. That'd be great.
Yeah. All right.
I'll hand it off to Taylor.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Jenny introduced me earlier. If I haven't met everyone, I'm Taylor and Finger. I co-lead the user group with Jenny. So we've got several upcoming MUG meetings happening, not just in Atlanta, but there's several that are around the country and some that are international as well, in case you want to get over to Australia or Japan and attend a couple international MUGs. Those are in there as well. So as Jenny mentioned earlier, if you haven't signed up through Bevy, you'll be able to access all of the links and register for these MUGs through Bevy. And there's a link in the deck as well if you'd like to register for any of those. So any topics you might see that are interesting. And we have already scheduled our next MUG for ATL, which is going to be recapping the Adobe Summit sessions. And we're going to be having Katarina Sue, who is one of our Atlanta-based Marketo Certified Experts, and she's going to be presenting to let us know which ones we should go back and watch in case anybody missed any. So hopefully you guys can join us. It's on May 11th at noon. So we'll be having our lunch together again that day if you guys can join us. And then last but not least, Brandon Benjamin is going to be speaking to us today. He is a marketing technology manager at PagerDuty. His background is in B2B demand generation, and he's got over 5 years of experience in digital marketing, from revenue operations, account-based marketing strategy, and email operations. And he's got 3 years of expertise in managing marketing operations programs, and has also worked to align sales and marketing. He's got a good background there. And would like to also announce that he, as Jenny already mentioned, was recently awarded the Marketo Champion for 2021. And so was Jenny. So we have 2 people on the call today that have been awarded this year as Marketo Champion. So if anybody else wants to apply next year, we'd love to see more people apply, and excited to see that happen with more and more people in Atlanta getting nominated and getting chosen. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Brandon to talk about APIs, webhooks, and the Salesforce integration. So Brandon, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you for that introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon. As Taylor mentioned, I'm a marketing technology manager at PagerDuty. I'm excited today to talk about what APIs are, how can you use them with webhooks at Marketo, and how a lot of these foundational aspects of APIs affect the Salesforce sync and how you can optimize it. So whenever I'm talking about APIs or anything on the web, it's always good to just look at a typical example from our day-to-day navigation on our to our favorite websites or products or whatnot. So chances are everyone on this call uses a web browser to navigate to see what the weather is, or to go to Google to search for whatever you need to do. And under the hood, there are API requests happening all over that. There are multiple API requests happening while you do that. So in this example here, navigating to google.com or whatever the case is, behind the hood, there are interactions happening via a protocol or convention called HTTP, which is sending your request in a packet of some sorts with the address google.com, for example, to a server that is representative of an IP address that Google owns. And it looks at your package and says, if you're searching for a cat image, for example, it says, I am Google and I have this image for you. Send this back to the requester. And it uses that protocol, that convention, HTTP, to respond to you and say, here's your image, or hello world. And again, in that very simple interaction, there are APIs mainly in the browser that are running to make sure that you, the user, don't have to do any of that manual work, like requesting, actually making that request when you hit enter in the browser. That's actually an API call happening in your browser. The storage of your cookies when you're navigating between sites so that you don't have to authenticate over and over again. That's happening via API, and actually manipulation of the page that you're seeing also uses browser-based APIs as well. And you don't see this under the hood unless you actually go and investigate, but they're happening all over, and it's really it unlocks a new world if you really understand how they work and how you could use them in your role. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's a convention that two or more parties have agreed upon of how to communicate. So you, as the client, say in Marketo, make a request to a server and use this interface or use this convention. And the convention might say that you need to use url.com to speak to me, and you need to send your request in a certain format, and you need to expect a response in a certain format, and the response would be A, B, or C. And that's a very simplified documentation, but that in and of itself is representative of what an API is. And our use cases in Marketo are endless. You can use APIs to enrich your prospects as they come into your system, verify if an email is valid or not. You can request an email to be sent via another ESP, like SendGrid or MailChimp or whatever the case is, if your use case warrants that. Again, the use cases are endless. And I think this is a good time for us to maybe talk about how you all are using APIs at your companies, or how you would like to use them. and I can start off and say I use APIs to move data around as it comes into the system. So if I'm accepting only country and email on a form, I might want a country, first name, and email on a form. I might want to check the validity of that email. If the country is not standardized properly, I might want to standardize it. So if I try to sync it, it doesn't fail. So those are some of the use cases that I use it for in my day to day.
I can answer if you were looking for input. You're asking about how to use APIs?
Sure, yeah. So how do you all use APIs at your organization? So how would you like to use them if you were curious about it?
Yeah, I've had a couple of different scenarios. I think we presented at this mug last year about you can use them to tie into any sort of platform, and so we use one to tie into geolocation software to find like the closest dealership or retail location for a given customer, and then kind of send them an email that's tailored back for that location, so they could get the street address and some directions on Google Maps.
That's neat. Yeah, that's that is definitely a interesting use case that you would have a lot of manual work and trouble trying to do that by Marketo by itself.
Yes.
Anyone? Yeah, anyone else?
I've used it to pull form IDs sometimes for inventorying the client forms and then migrating from instance to instance. So that's one way we pull the information. Also, given all of the new policies on how long they keep activity data, sometimes we'll be pulling it regularly for clients who want to keep that and store it. So we use that, and then we also use it to mass approve some stuff. I usually use Postman or a third-party tool as well.
That's yeah, I do that as well. If you ever had to, if you ever get that email from Marketo that says, "Hey, all these smart campaigns are about to expire, or we're about to auto turn them off because of cleanup or whatnot," if you can get a list of them, you can make a mass request to, if they're low volume, make a mass request to turn them all off and then turn them back on so that they last for another 90 days or whatever the number is. Yeah, that's a creative one for sure.
Cool.
Brandon, doesn't they help you a lot with like custom objects, right? Like
Yeah,
APIs is really how you need to use if you're going to use a custom object in your instance, right?
definitely. Yeah, without it, you are very much limited to how you can use a custom object in Marketo, but with it, there's so much more power with the Marketo API and others. There's so much more power to move data around and make them much more accessible. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Right. So I like to give a analogy of uh, transportation, of how it would fit into understanding how APIs are set up and how to use them. So the first thing is security. APIs generally have some mechanism of security. There is the basic, or there is a basic form of securing an API via an API key, which you are probably familiar with, where the vendor says, "Here is the key for you to use this service," and that is almost exactly like a key to your car. Presumably you're the only one with access to that, and you can drive your car as long as you start the car with that key. But anyone else that gets access to that can do the same. Like that key is not unique to you. If anyone else gets it, anyone else can drive that car. There's another method of basic authentication, which requires like a username and password. And there's vehicles where I don't know if you remember, they have like these codes on the door handle, and you can program it to like enter in like a 4 or 5 digit code, and it's keyless. You don't have to like open the car with the key. You can enter in the code and the door opens. In a similar way, there are APIs that use a username and a password, and you have to authenticate as whoever you say you are to use that. Again, anyone who gets that code or anyone that has access to your username or password can access the API. It's not dynamically securing you or securing access to the API. And then there's OAuth, more to the point, dynamic OAuth. Marketo's API uses this, so I don't know if you've ever created a custom service where you get a client ID and a secret, and then you have to click a button that says get token, and it generates a token for you. And I don't know if you've ever tried to use it. After 20 minutes or so, it says, hey, this token is expired. And it's very much what's happening in the background. It's dynamically doing that to make sure that the person that should be accessing this is accessing it. And that's very similar to if you could unlock your car door with like a Google Authenticator app. So you have to unlock your phone with your phone's code or whatever the case is. And then Google Authenticator generates like a 6-digit code, and then that code expires. So if someone were to get access to your phone, they'd have to at least be able to get into, if you have Face ID set up, for example, they'd have to at least be able to get into your phone and then get into the app to remotely unlock your door. So it is a lot more secure than the other methods. Another convention that APIs use is the idea of a policy. There are 3 types of policies. There's public policy, private policy, and a partner policy. Public policy is similar to taking a free shuttle, which is sponsored by your municipality. There are vendors that work with the government to add structure to the data that comes from like the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the census or whatnot, geolocation data as well. Anyone can access that because the government wants to make that free and accessible so that you can know what a certain county is called or how that city and state is standardized by that municipality. So the state I'm in, Georgia, it may have a 2-digit state code GA and then a capital of Atlanta, and you can get that from that API, and it's standardized and sponsored. You don't have to pay for it. There's a private API, which you all are probably most familiar with, where you have to sign up yourself for it and probably pay to have access to that. And that's very similar to leasing a car, where you are the leasee of the car. No one else is leasing it but you, and it's a private interaction between you and the dealer or the bank. And then there's a partner policy, which it's reminiscent of when you're using DoorDash or Uber Eats or Uber or Lyft. There's a map that sits in your platform that's communicating with Lyft or communicating with Google Maps or whatever to let the driver of Lyft know where to take you next, right? And it's all happening in the background, and you, the person who's using that service, you're not privy to that API interaction, but they have a very streamlined interaction, Uber, Lyft, and these map providers, so that they're not having they have like an economies of scale relationship. So because they're making millions of calls, it makes sense to these vendors to have these kind of partner relationships. But you couldn't get that partner relationship. You'd have to apply for that or use a private version. And that's similar to, you and your friend both own cars, you swap the cars and go about your way. And there's a implicit relationship between the both of you that you all will be sharing that. And at the end of it, you can exchange your cars back. The last part of the convention that's important to understand is the method of how the API actually sends data and exchanges data. And vehicle navigation is a very good example of thinking about this. So if you want to figure out, well, how do I get to my nearest grocery store from where I'm at? You're basically sending a GET request to that resource on the GPS. So if the GPS says that the location of this place is at www.location.com, you're sending a GET request to that, and your phone says, here's the location, here's how you get there. If you want to add a new location on the map that's not there, your favorite, let's say, store or small chain just opened up and they're not on the map, and it's very difficult for them to be found unless you know where you're going, you can add a map address on the map, and that's called posting to the endpoint. You're creating a resource so that someone can get that resource later. They can figure out where to go later on once it's been posted to the map. And then similarly, you can delete a resource using the delete method. And that would be similar to a location that doesn't exist anymore. They moved to a new location and you can remove them from the map. Here's a sample API that if we were a vendor, we could create. And the resource would be atlantamug.com. And we accept one parameter called the event. And every time that there's an event in April, May, or whatnot, it's a string that's just the month and the year concatenated together. And security is not required because this is a public event. Anyone can sign up and learn more about it. And the only thing you need to do to use our API is make a GET request to atlantamug.com with your parameter. So if we were to set this up and you were to send a GET request to that resource, the interaction here, the client, would be saying to us, hey, can I have some data, please? Here's the request. And we would say, sure, here you go. Again, not securing that because it is a public interaction. And our documentation, if we're thinking about API architecture and being very diligent about that, we would add a speaker introduction to that response. We tell you the format that the response is coming back to you in. In this case, it's JSON, could be other formats. And our documentation introduces who the speaker is, tells you about the current activity, and tells you the time that it's happening. So you can see here in this JSON JavaScript object notation is what it stands for. It tells you these are key value pairs, and this speaker introduction is a key that is itself a grouping or an array that we call it of data. And the speaker introduction key has my name as a key, which is Brandon, has an integer, years that I've been using Marketo, and my favorite food. And this is how we structured the speaker introduction object. And then there's another one that tells you the current activity, and you can get the title and the description of what we're doing at this point and the timestamp as well. And this is in and of itself a very simple API that we could publish and use to inform you all of, even though there's platforms that do this already for us, but we could set this up and make this live. So I'm going to make a sample request using Postman to the Kickbox API. So what I like to do, and I'll just walk you through like how I do things when I'm setting up an API for the first time. So I'll open up Postman, and the Postman UI tells you what kind of method you're using. You can select the method there. And I know what method to use by looking at the documentation. If the documentation is relatively good, it'll tell you using HTTP, or there's this other method called curl, which is just a way of making requests from a client. It'll tell you there what kind of method to send and how to send that actual request. And if you see here, you'll see that when you'll have to sign up, create an API key, so you know that they're securing it with a API key that is static. It's not. You can tell here that you're creating an API key once, and I can go through that process here by going to manage and then hitting this create API key, giving it a name, test. And I see here permissions, and I'm not sure what that means. So I can go back to the documentation here, and I see during the API key creation process, you will need to specify which API endpoints the key has permission to use. So it's semi-securing the key so that if someone gets this key, you can go in and say, well, if they don't have my username and password, I can uncheck these and they won't be able to do much with it. So what I'm going to do is select all of these and generate it. And now I have my key. Now what I can do is I can take this URL here that they have, copy it and paste it into there. And I'll just do this for the sake of demonstrating. It says responds, it says false, success is false. And here, this is the body of your response. It'll say success or give you a response of whatever you sent from whatever you send in the format that you specify. You can see here it's in JSON. I can change it to XML, etc. And it says that this was false. And you can see here, this code tells you these, what happened when you sent it. Usually you want it to be 200, but if it's not, you can use this to figure out what you need to fix. And I can see here, it was false because I did not add an API key. So I'm going to add an API key here now by going into Kickbox. Adding that. And I need to go back to the documentation to figure out how I need to add that here. And I need to add it with this key here, API key. So I'm going to add that here. Oops. And send that. And it says bad request. And the reason why it says bad request is because the format that they're expecting it to be in is that they've hard coded this and said, hey, in order for you to use this, you need to send an email first, then add your API key. So the way that I know that is because I went through this before the call, but you can use the response as well. And usually there are there are test responses in here, errors that tell you what you might need to fix. So I know at first I got forbidden because that was my API key wasn't right, but now it says bad request. That's usually because the request of the API call was not in a format that they expected it to be in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this here to say email equals, I'm just going to put my email in here, benjamin24@gmail.com. Then I'm going to say ampersand because that's the format that they want it in. They want the API key to succeed the email. And then I'll send that. And here we go. We got a 200 OK that worked. And even if you don't have any idea what any of this means, you know that it worked right here by looking at the response. And you can use the API documentation with the endpoint that we were using. You can get the endpoint from here to figure out, well, what this means. And it tells you here that this result can be deliverable, undeliverable, risky, or unknown, and says that it shows that my email is deliverable, so that's good. And it gives you the reason and all these other values that we can now do anything else that we want to do with. And that is, how I go through the process of testing an API. And once I've got it set up, I can go into Marketo and put it into one of my workflows. So one thing that so something that may or may not be immediately obvious is how do we actually use these how do we actually make an API call from Marketo? As far as I know, there's no postman in Marketo for you to actually make a call and pass data around. There is no interface to host the code. Postman in the background is actually running this on its own platform as a service for you, and you don't see any of that. But all of this is happening in the background, and all you have to do is send your request. It runs what it needs to run, and it shows you what your request is. But you would have to do that yourself to actually make an API call. You'd have to set up your own code to make a call and so on and so forth. And Marketo by itself doesn't have the functionality to do that. The other thing that's important to know is the method of authentication. And Marketo's authentication is the perfect example. So if you set up an API call, and you probably have done it with a webhook. If you set that up in Marketo, you probably run into the issue where after that token expires, you need to go in and change that. And if you're doing that, you're probably going in and changing it manually. You're going in, generating the code, and then putting it back into the header or whatever the case is and running it again. But that's not happening automatically. And that's why in and of itself, it's difficult to work with. But webhooks can help us at least use API calls in a scalable and a functional way where we don't need Postman or any kind of UI to actually run these. We can run them ourselves through Marketo and work them into our workflow. So webhooks are event driven. Outside of the scope of Marketo, a webhook, you would configure it in some other location and you subscribe to events. So in the case of our pseudo MUG platform, we could create an API platform. We could create webhooks that say anytime an event starts, you can be notified of it, right? And you would tell us where to send that notification, and we can tell you what events you could subscribe to, when it's starting, when it's ending, and so on and so forth. And in Marketo, you can create a custom header or send your parameters, your security parameters in a URL like we did here, where we literally hard-coded it in the URL and said, this is what our API key is. You can do that as well, or use a custom header to tell the server, here is my authorization method, sorry. And in this case, it's basic, and then my password is ABC123. The server will respond, hey, I know who you are, and here's the content that you can expect. And I'm going to navigate into the Marketo UI, and to get to webhooks, you just go, you click Super Bowl. If your UI looks like this, it's a lot of people's probably changed at this point. Go down to webhooks, and then either create a new webhook, or I have one that's already pre-configured. And then one other thing that's important to note is the response mappings here. So you can go in here, create a new one. You can edit a current one or clone. You can set up your header here, which is here in this case, if you want to tell the server, you can see like an example of headers here. You can tell the server what kind of content type to expect. You can tell the server what's your authentication, like your password or whatnot, and there are other things that you can put in the header here. And the response mappings are how you actually tell Marketo what to update, what fields to update. So in this example, when I send this request, then I go to the body, you can see this result key is mapped to this response attribute here. So result is here, and I have created a custom field in Marketo called kickbox result, which is associated with that attribute. And then I created another field called reason, which is called kickbox reason. And you need to, beforehand, actually create these, and you need to be aware of what the field types are. And usually the documentation will tell you here what it is. So you can see here that it tells you if you want to store the role, it's a true or false. It's a Boolean field. You need to create a Marketo custom field that's a Boolean so that it updates properly. The Sendex score is a float. So you need to create a float field in Marketo that can store a field that can support a decimal or multiple decimals, and like a string, where the result is a string, reason is a string, email, and so on and so forth. So with this pre-configured webhook already, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the process of creating a new person. So, and I'm going to Type in Atlanta MUG 2021 test at, let's just say, gmail.com. Let me actually change this to my email so that it's deliverable. And the company will be, let's just say, NA. And here we go. So now I have a webhook. I have a smart campaign that I've created that the smart campaign is requestable so that I can go into the UI here and request it just for ease of use, or tie it to any other workflow that I have in Marketo. But as you all know, you can add anything else in here. And in the flow, I just have call webhook. So I'm going to request this. I wish this was faster, but it's taking its time. And this is why I do all my testing, or I figure out how the call should look, the authentication and everything. I do that in Postman. Postman is light years faster. This whole process, if you were testing it only in Marketo, you've got to like request it multiple times, and it's a pain. Here is much faster, and you can see here I can click into this person. You can click into the activity log, and I see that my request campaign activity is there, and you can see the call webhook is here. And if you're wondering, well, why the webhook happened before you you called the webhook first, why did the change data values happen separately? Change data values from webhooks happen asynchronously. It does not happen where when you call the webhook, then the fields are updated. It's happening, that particular interaction is separate. So the webhook running and completing and the fields updating are two separate operations you can think of. And that's why it looks like that, and as opposed to like the webhook being first and then the change data values happening. So if I go in here, I can see that this is the API call that I made. You can see the request type. You can see the response is here. And the response code is 200. And then the more important thing is that the fields that I mapped to were updated. So if I go into there and I see what the result was deliverable, and the reason was accepted email. And if you want to know what those are, the documentation covers, the reasons here: accepted email address was accepted by the SMTP server, a type of server that sends and responds mail, and the reason here, or that it was deliverable, undeliverable, and so on and so forth. And you can see that those were updated there. Right. So this is just the beginning. There's so much more that you can do with APIs and webhooks. One thing that learning the foundational aspects of APIs can help with is the Salesforce sync. Marketo actually is using, behind the hood, the Salesforce API to make changes on your behalf, get the changes that it should make on all of the objects that you're syncing, make those changes over, determine if it should make those changes based on if the value changed in Salesforce or Marketo at that sync interval, and do all of those under the hood so that you're not maintaining that. You turn on the Salesforce sync and it syncs in every 5 minutes, or based on how you have it set up, if you're using like the manual sync to Salesforce flow step or program campaign sync or whatnot. So how do these conventions, learning these conventions, help us? Well, one convention or one aspect of APIs that you should always follow is volume, or understand how it works is volume. And usually you want to be very cognizant of the amount of data that you're passing, because the more data that you're sending, all else being equal, the more expensive it is to maintain that service. So if you have 100 or 200 fields synced for every object, you cannot tell Marketo, hey, I know I have 100 fields if they're all visible to the user. I know I have 100 fields coming from Salesforce, but I only want you to look at these 5. If the fields changed in Salesforce or Marketo's going to look at it, see if the data is different, and sync it over. There's no way to say, unless you change the visibility rules, only get these few fields. You need to do that in Salesforce. So it's important for you to do that before you set up your Salesforce sync. Figure out what data that you need access to, what data should be syncing between the systems to make the sync more efficient. And the most flagrant things that I've seen are fields that are tracking like the time between a trial or time between usage of a product or some kind of other thing in Salesforce that maybe the finance team needs, and it's tracking the date time. It's like looking at a difference between dates, and that's updating daily, ideally, right? And if you have 100,000 records in Salesforce and 50,000 of those have that field set, that's going to change every single day, and it's going to consume sync volume that you don't need it to consume, and just make it more inefficient. So make the Marketo user, you need to go through that process of saying, does the Marketo user need to see these fields? Do we have anything triggering off of this, or would we do that in the future? And if not, make the user or go into Salesforce and make the user not be able to see those fields. It's in the visibility rules for the sync user, or field visibility, sorry, for those actual fields. You can remove Marketo's ability to see that field or make changes to it so that the field is not in Marketo anymore, and it won't sync over. It won't check to see if it needs to sync it. The other thing that is important to know is just the overall protocol, like how the API works. And very simple things are adhering to validation rules. Marketo cannot overwrite or avoid your validation rules that are in Salesforce. So if your Salesforce administrator said we only accept country values that are 3-digit country values, and your Marketo forms are accepting free text country fields or 2-digit country codes, you're going to get those errors that say field validation exception. We couldn't sync this record over. And that's the protocol or the convention that Salesforce and Marketo have agreed to follow. So you cannot circumvent that. You need to do the validation on the Marketo side, or make the country validation in Salesforce less restrictive. Pick list restrictions, field uniqueness, etc. They all follow the same convention based on the API, and your Marketo flow and syncing needs to follow those same restrictions. And overall, you need to have the correct permissions. The Marketo sync user needs to be able to see the fields that you want to sync, or it needs to be able to have access to edit a field if it should be able to sync a value over, make changes to the value and sync it over to Salesforce. If not, Salesforce won't be able to see that update. And that's it. If there's any questions, we'd love to walk through them.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, we've got 13 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions for Brandon, we can use the rest of the time to answer any questions you may have around APIs or webhooks or the Salesforce integration.
Brandon, that means you did a good job.
I guess.
Yeah, no, this was really, really thorough. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you.
Or does
I know
anybody
I
have any?
personally. Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
Or if anybody has anything to add or anything they're doing they think is cool that they'd want to share in relation to any of this, that's also very welcome.
Yeah, any other best practices that you all adhere to, or any other things that you all are doing with APIs?
Well, I have one thing I can add about what you were saying about the field permissions, limiting those in Salesforce for fields Marketo doesn't use. So if you add later, like if you make visible a field in Salesforce, make it visible to Marketo that wasn't initially visible, that field syncs over to Marketo, but all the data in that field won't necessarily sync over right away. It'll sync over upon an update happening to a record. And so
Right.
it's not all going to show up right away. So if you need data like right away for something in Marketo, you might need to do like a mass, fake update on the Salesforce side for it to sync over, which is
Right.
best done on like a night or weekend and not in the middle of the workday.
Right. Yeah, and I think that implicitly brings up another point where like system planning and engineering of how your business works is so important to do from the onset, right? So if you're, maybe you can't make the case to purchase Marketo when you're purchasing Salesforce, but when you're making these decisions to say, hey, we're going to use Salesforce and we might eventually down the line use Marketo, think about like the fields that you want to use before you make these investments, right? So that you don't have to run into that scenario where, oh, we need to add this field later on, and then there's all these gotchas, which she called out. You could do all this planning in the beginning and then